Hi, I'm Coach Amber, and welcome to the Meet RX Success Story podcast. Today we have Eric with us. Welcome, Eric.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Eric, tell us, what was your life like prior to moving in a more meat-based direction? Did you have any issues? Did you have any health issues, any weight issues, anything like that?
Yeah, I had kind of an interesting health journey. In my early 20s, I was overweight, but you wouldn't have said so. You know, it didn't look it, but I was. But I was sick. I had a lot of really serious allergies and sinus infections, throat infections, digestive problems, headaches. And I'd been visiting doctors for years to try to sort it out, and it didn't help. And one day I sat down with a bunch of friends and we started talking. This is 1991. We started talking a little bit about food and the role that food plays and all this kind of stuff. And so initially I made some changes at that point. And one of my first, it's funny, I think a lot about this, that, you know, I cut out refined sugar and I cut out some, refined grains, but I also gave up meat at that point, and I went into the vegetarian world. But what was interesting is that when you give up sugar or you give up wheat, or you don't change your identity, but when you give up meat, you change your identity. And so I became a vegan, according to everybody. And then my health turned around so dramatically that I assumed that it was my veganism that had done it, rather than all the other things that I'd also changed. And so I at that point I was doing a lot of research about food and food psychology and so on, because it's been my biggest mystery, my biggest passion since 91. And I started discovering some things about human history and about our relationship with hunting and meat, and even chimpanzees and their relationship with hunting and meat. And in the middle of all this, I was training for the London Marathon, and I had not now had meat in a few years. And I woke up one night salivating, having had a dream of eating meat. And I'm like, that's not addiction. That is craving. That is my body asking for something. And so I slowly reintroduced meat back into my life. And it was life-changing. I mean, suddenly I was back to having energy consistently. My weight became a whole lot more manageable. Like everything seemed to work a whole lot better. And that's when I began to realize that what I had done the first time is I'd gone from unhealthy meat eating to healthy not meat eating to then healthy meat eating. And that was the sort of transformation I had to go through.
I love that. That is so perfect. And I think it is a lot of times true. It's a lot about what you're not eating as well as what you are eating. So it's an interesting thing. Okay, so give us a kind of an idea of what you eat in a typical day. And when you started implementing more animal-based foods, did you have any transitional issues?
So I follow one of the principles of our company and the way we do these things is that humans evolved both the ability and the requirement to go through seasonal change. And so very often when I'm on podcasts or in the media or what have you, people are always asking like, well, what do you eat on a typical day? Normal question. What I would suggest is that question is very much like the RDA. Like there is no typical day. There is a typical year. The reason that humans are able to buffer certain vitamins and minerals is that we didn't have ready access to them every single day. So there is no typical day. There's what do I do all year long? And so with that in mind, what I would suggest is that we follow a seasonal pattern. So for example, if it is, let's say it's summer. So in summer, and I don't mean summer where I am, I mean, I make a decision based on my goals at that particular time, what sports I'm interested in or what my goals are for weight, or if I'm working out and that kind of stuff, then I choose my seasons appropriately. So if I'm in the fall time or summer, then we know that in the summer there would have been, ready access to berries and that kind of stuff. So I will be a little bit more flexible about my carb intake during that time, right up into fall. And of course, I will put on weight during that time because that's what sugar is for. Then we go into winter. And so a typical day during that time might involve, prior to winter, a typical day might involve a little bit of fruit, a little bit of berries, a little bit of root vegetables from time to time and so on. But when we got to winter, that's when we will usually focus on some intermittent fasting or outright fasting, and in order to trigger autophagy and burning out old proteins and that kind of stuff. Then spring comes, and our ancestors probably grew up with spring that worked like it was basically triggered by the original rains. Like you might not know this, but it's a quirky little thing. But antelopes, they breed for about 6 weeks, but they all have their babies on almost the same day. And the reason they do that is that if they didn't do that, imagine you have a herd of 300 antelopes and one drops its babies on Monday, then the lions come and eat the baby. And then another one drops it on Tuesday, the lions come and eat the baby. And then on Wednesday, and if this happened over the 6 weeks, all the babies would get eaten. But by having all their babies on the same day, the lion gets full. And some of the babies are given the extra few days to develop their strength. In other words, the minute the rains come, hunting gets easy. And so we move into spring, and in our programs that we have vegans, and, they go into what we call a vegan version of spring. And then we have people who go into another version of spring where they're meat-based, but they might be having some plant foods. And then we also have what we call hunter spring, where somebody might do a pure, what you guys would call pure carnivore period, where they're on a pure meat-based diet during that time. And that's what spring would be like. So I hope that answers your question. It's not quite as specific as you have to, but that's roughly what it looks like.
That's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to have to dig into that a little bit more, because I do find that very fascinating. And I did not know that about the antelopes. Did not know that. That's very interesting. Okay, so since you were vegan and then you started to introduce meat again, did you have any issues with that?
No, I mean, again, it's been a long time. I mean, we're talking 20 plus years now. So it's not like I totally remember, but remember, we have to be like, when people do have issues doing that, I generally think that the issues come down to sometimes emotional issues, like they've been so ideologically influenced by the vegan movement that they feel sick when they eat meat. But it's no different than the Pavlovian dog response. It's not their body actually being sick. It's a psychological problem. And then sometimes it's because people go, well, I'm going to go back to eating meat. And then they go eat garbage. They eat garbage meat. And so in my case, I was really clear about that. I ate wild caught fish. I ate wild poultry. I ate, bison was a big feature for me at that point, bison and buffalo, because it was very readily available. So my body I never had any adverse reaction. The one thing that I point out to people that they need to know when they, because our clients are often switching, right? They're going from spring and then they move on. And so in some seasons they're burning carbs more, and then other seasons they're burning fats more, or proteins for that matter. And one of the things we tell them is that if you don't do it regularly, the switch to what we call spring, whether you do full carnivore hunter spring or even just regular spring, means that your body now needs to burn fat primarily. And if you don't do that very regularly, the body isn't so good at it. And so it might take 2 or 3 days or 2 weeks, even in worst cases, where you have a bit of a cold or energy problems or even some rashes and that kind of stuff as your body adapts. But once you've done it a few times, then your body flips the switch in moments. The way we talk about it in WildFit is that you've got this switch. There's sugar burning and there's fat burning. And most people in the Western world have been like on the sugar burning side for so long that it's like takes real effort to move it over to the fat burning. And then all they have to do is smell honey and boom, it goes back. But once you fix that switch and lubricated it, what you find is the switch actually very comfortably lives in fat burning, and occasionally will pop over to deal with sugar when that happens. And so we always tell people about that transition when they move to spring, or they move to a hunter spring or carnivore. And then here's another one, which is just a little silly, but I don't know if you guys have really come across this. But people come along and they go, Eric, I'm in spring and now I'm feeling a bit constipated. And I'm like, okay, hold on. Let's talk about that. Sometimes there is some constipation because your gut bacteria needs to change. You're changing seasons, so you're going to change your gut bacteria. But there's another thing that people don't really think about, and I'm sure you guys have, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. And that is that if you eat a pound of spinach, you're going to shit out half a pound of cellulose. If you eat a pound of bison, your body uses almost all of it. So there's not a lot of poop to have. So you might not be constipated. You just might not be full of shit. So, these are some of the transitional things that we've seen with our clients.
That is so dead on. I love that. Okay, so let me see if I can phrase this right. When you did incorporate more animal-based foods from just eating, fruits and vegetables, did you notice any improvements right away? Like what was the benefit of doing that, I guess is what I'm asking.
In my case, I do remember distinctly because, I was training for a marathon, and I often notice that people are far more aware of the impact that food has on their lives when they're doing peak performance. So if they're into bodybuilding or jujitsu or Bikram yoga, or marathon running, then they really notice their body's relationship with food a lot better. And so because I was training for the marathon at the time, I really truly found that the long distance running suddenly became easier. Like and by the way, I didn't train like most people. Most people train up to about 18 miles. They do like 3 or 4 18-mile runs a week, preparing for the 26-mile run. I didn't. My last 2 weeks before the marathon, I did 3 30-mile runs a week so that the marathon would feel easy. And I don't think I would have been able to pull that off if I hadn't made the change. Looking at it now, I really noticed that all of a sudden I was able to power through the endurance running. And you know, how much that has to do with the fact that I was taking all these proteins, or the fact that I was burning fat rather than the previous, you know, burning sugar and dealing with, you know, plants. And I'll tell you, you might find this interesting, bearing in mind what you guys do, but you know, how I kind of stumbled upon this whole thing is that my dad came to me one day, and he's very knowledgeable about human history and evolution and all that stuff. And his grandfather was the archaeologist who found the oldest Homo sapien skull in history. So it runs in the family. We've been interested a long time. And my dad came to me one day and he goes, I noticed, Eric, in your talks that you tell people that if they are going to eat plants, that they should focus on old world plants and not new world plants. So they should avoid generally plants that come from the Americas and focus on plants that come from Africa and Asia. And he said, I think I understand why you recommend that, but what I don't understand is that you don't make the same distinction for animals. You tell people it's just as good to eat an African animal as it is to eat a bison. What's the difference? So here's the difference. Plants don't want to be eaten. Arguably, fruit might kind of want to be eaten a little bit, but they don't want their seeds digested, right? And the plants don't want to be eaten. So every plant is going to try and fight digestion. And it's going to do that with enzyme blockers and hormone triggers and lectins and all kinds of different anti-nutrients. Now, in Africa, we've been living with those plants for millions of years. And so we've evolved the ability to process them. We're much better at old world plants than we are new world plants. Suddenly, 500 years ago, Europeans show up in the Americas and they think that they can eat potatoes and that that's not going to come with a consequence like migraine headaches for many people, because those plants have anti-nutrients in them that we've never evolved the defense mechanisms for. Conversely, with animals, that same principle doesn't exist because animals defend themselves largely physically rather than biochemically. So plants protect themselves sometimes physically with thorns, but mostly they protect themselves biochemically. Giraffes do not have long necks because they were trying to reach the top of the plant. Giraffes have long necks so they can spread their herd out over distance because acacia trees produce tannin. So if I'm a giraffe and I start eating this tree, it starts making tannin, and the other tree beside it starts producing tannin and pushing it into leaves. So the leaves taste awful. So in order for you to eat much further away, you need a much longer neck to keep track of the herd, right? So plants are fighting back all the time, but animals rarely fight biochemically, like, you know, the water buck in Africa does and the skunk does. But mostly animals defend themselves with horns and teeth and claws and speed and camouflage. Once you have defeated that, the flesh is no longer fighting. And so whether you're eating an American bison or an African buffalo, the meat is readily available and easily processable by you.
That is fascinating. You've given me some things to research for sure. And Eric, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story. It is absolutely fascinating. And thank you so much for coming on.
No worries. Thanks for having me. And thanks for doing the good work you guys are doing out there.
Thank you. Bye, Eric.